Greetings, I'm Suzanne Titkemeyer. I used to write a column for Pathos at No Longer Quivering for almost 10 years. Before that, a couple of years, I was working with No Longer Quivering. So today, we're doing chapters 9 and 10 of Debbie Pearl's book on bad brains, the big book of bad brains, I call it. Oh, and this one may be a long one because I've just discovered that this is the chapter with the famous Stanford Marshmallow Experiment. And I have to explain that because she mangles that too. She really does. It's kind of funny the things she gets wrong and the things she gets extremely right. So let's take a look. Go back in. Yeah, my mouse has stopped working on my computer, so I'm having to actually use the screen. Okay, so we start off. Let me go back. Yep. Okay, where were we? Chapter 9. Well, I tried to do a chapter per my notes for each part, but I didn't always manage it because some chapters like this one took a lot more. This is a chapter where Debbie starts explaining about, oops, I gotta get that stable. Debbie starts explaining about executive function. Executive function, and here's the thing, executive function is an important thing in your life. It really is. And there are so many things that can mess up your ability to have executive function. Abusive parents, being a child who's super stressed out. There's so many things. And there's also some evidence, some of our executive function abilities are actually inborn. They have nothing to do with environment or anything else. So Debbie's making the claim that executive function, let me change this light. For some reason, every time I wear this green shirt, it shows as gray. Oh, that made it look more gray. Okay, it's like a moss green. Every time I wear it, I'm like, why am I wearing gray? So that's my side ramble. I'm one of those people that's got bad brains, I guess. So Debbie claims the best training that you can give your child is the ability to make executive decisions, to exercise. Others that have had meltdowns when they've had to do things like pick out clothes to wear because their husbands wanted to buy a special outfit, or pick a restaurant or what they wanted to eat off the menu. She's described them having meltdowns over those things. And they've described their own selves that way. So it doesn't look like any executive function from here. Debbie describes this executive function. Her understanding of it is only partial. She says it's stuff like paying attention, being able to be organized and plan things out. When you initiate a task and you can stay focused and finish your task, regulating your own emotions, then self-monitoring, keeping track of where you are and your goals and what you're doing, staying on task. In other words, it's every single thing that Michael Pearl is not. Then she goes on to claim that IQ, reading, and book smarts do not matter and will not get you ahead. It's only executive function. Experience, here's a quote by her, experience shows that success is often based more on aptitude and less on ability. Maybe in some other world, but in the everyday workaday world, that's not true. Attitude may be helpful. You better know what in the hell you're doing and be able to do it right, or they're going to let you go. Except for maybe now where there is more jobs than there are workers, you might be able to slide with half-assed work. Then Debbie goes on to make an even more ludicrous claim in light of everything we know about the Pearl family. Quote, interpersonal effectiveness is dependent on our ability to manage the emotions of others. And then she goes on to talk about how social skills are everything, and teaching a child to regulate their feelings and the feelings of those around them is everything. She used all these stupid stories about kids melting down over a variety of circumstances. And she claims none of those kids have been taught to regulate their emotions. And the parents, by allowing such outbursts, are brain grooving into bad, bad, dire things. And then we get to something else she talks about. She talks about a scientific experiment she declines to name. She doesn't name the organization running the test or any other identifying information on the study. Okay, so her long fake story, shortened and condensed. They told the teacher of 5 students that her students all had high IQs. She taught them all year, and at the end of the year, she was told the kids were average. They only performed to the high IQ standard because they expected to. I Googled and looked and read all these educational websites trying to find that particular study, and I couldn't find it at all. I don't even know where that is. It's like a mystery. But she makes these claims about high IQ and everything else, and how you only will perform to your top ability if you have somebody goading you and pushing you to it, which is a bunch of BS. Okay. So then we start talking about impulse control. That's another thing that seems to be severely lacking. And severely lacking in her world. And Mike Pearl seems like he has no impulse control. So here's a very silly quote by her. How does learning delayed gratification translate to adulthood? Self-control helps the cigarette smoker lay down his habit because he knows it is bad for him. It causes compulsive shoppers to stop sooner rather than later. It means gambling, overspending, poor eating habits that lead to obesity will not be a problem in their lives. It plays a role in controlling anger, lust, and depression. Oh, I don't even know where to start. I'm just gonna talk about the one that, if it sounds like Debbie has never watched a episode of Mad Men, because if she had, she would realize that. Well, if nothing else, the first season, the first couple of episodes dealt with the claims that smoking was unhealthy and how many doctors actually smoked, how many doctors did not smoke, and the health claims that the cigarette companies were making when they were promoting their products, that the federal government said, hey, you can't say that your product is healthy any longer. So they were trying to figure out a way to come around that, to promote cigarettes, even though there was a skull and crossbones being put on the cigarette pack saying smoking may cause cancer and kill you. So clearly it's not all about executive control, executive functioning, impulse control. If it were, then there wouldn't be that many people addicted to various substances. If it was just a matter of impulse control and executive learning and executive functions, there would be a lot less of all kinds of behaviors. And also, Debbie's blaming all these conditions, all these types of things on training, which we know in the Pearl world, training just means you whale the hell out of your kids. You just beat them until they stop whatever it is they're doing. I'm having to go back and forth between my notes. I do apologize. Whoops. Okay. And let me pull those up again. I just stupidly got rid of them. Trying to get back to them. So we're getting ready to go. I think this is all going to lead into the Marshmallow Experiment. Let me tell you a little bit about the Marshmallow Experiment while I'm pulling my notes back up. The Marshmallow Experiment started back in the 1970s, and they until recently, and they may still be doing quite a bit. The first time they ran the Marshmallow Experiment, they used kids that were 3 to 5 years old, and they offered them the choice of having a marshmallow right then or waiting 15 minutes and having a second marshmallow. What they found is about half of the kids took the immediate marshmallow. Where Debbie goes with all of this is to say that that they reran it recently and all the children take marshmallows. Where are we? I was back at the Marshmallow Experiment, which I do have pulled up. The thing is, here's the things that she's skipping about that. That figure where she's saying that all these kids took their first marshmallow right away now compared to then is wrong. That's not at all what the data says. Like I said, it started with Stanford University. They were doing this, and it did not take place in a school situation like she's trying to say. And she also talks about how if you don't eat everything homemade, you'll have bad guts, and that will cause you to have bad guts. And she said this crap about how, I got to read this. I got to start this with this because she somehow manages to link bad guts, thinking, and the marshmallow experiment and behavior together. Here's the Debbie quote. Well, I could tell you about the brain-gut health connection between a person can't have an emotionally and mentally stable brain without a well-functioning gut. The gut is the only part of the body that has the same type of cells as the brain. Some scientists have even suggested the gut is capable of thought just like the brain. And the microbes are really interesting. They're like our own garden of worms. If we mistreat them through too much stress, we are doomed. Okay, I have to debunk this first. That's not at all how the gut works. It doesn't think. There are no thinking cells in it. Even though there is, according to Johns Hopkins research, a link between the state of your bowels and your emotions. There can be a link. I will at least admit that. But the enteric system of the gut is incapable of thought. It can't do math. It can't balance your checkbook. So she is saying that if you are well controlled, you don't take drugs, you don't drink, you don't get hooked on whatever, that is because your gut is functioning correctly and you're taking in the right foods in the right amounts, and that your gut is doing your thinking for you, so you'll be perfectly healthy. And then she goes to the infamous marshmallow story she goes on to say it happened in a classroom, and that now all the kids take the first marshmallow instead of waiting 15 minutes and getting the 2 marshmallows, which is such BS. To me, this is possibly the worst of everything in her book, because this is taking a legitimate scientific study that was conducted over the course of 50 years. That the very first running of this test was with 3 to 5 year olds, and only half of them took the marshmallow right away. Half of them waited the 15 minutes and got 2 marshmallows. So the first one was not run in quite the most strict scientific standards. They didn't factor for a lot of things. And as they started examining where and why and everything else, what they came up with was wealthier households where there was no food instability, no instability of anything, had many more kids with delayed gratification responses than poorer households or households with food instability. That's what it boiled down to. So then they started rerunning the tests all over the world, and it was never run in a classroom at all, like Debbie states. It was strictly in a controlled laboratory setting. They started using children of different ages. They started accounting for socioeconomics and other factors. And that's why they started running the tests left and right on all kinds of kids. Here's what they found. They found the mean amount of kids delayed gratification was about half. And that's accounting for significant racial and cultural differences as well. So here's what Debbie said. This year, when they did the same test, most of the children demanded a marshmallow immediately. Only a few children sat patiently waiting. And like I said, this one is out and out a patent lie. And what really happened was, I think 2018 was maybe the last time that the statistics are available for when this test was run. I'm sure that the pandemic put a huge hurting on what they were saying. What they determined is that by 15 years of age, it didn't really matter. The kids pretty much caught up with each other. They also, the Watson, Duncan, and Kwan's 2018 conceptual replication yielded mostly statistically insignificant correlations with behavioral problems. Bingo, bango. And I would be very nervous and upset to know what Debbie might have to say with the issue of the Milgram experiment. I don't know how many people have done some research or reading so much crap. So then the next chapter, we're back somewhere where we've been before. You know what that is? Oh, what the heck? No, I'm not leaving. Heck no. Stay on page. Okay. So the next one was all about screens. Okay. That's something we've covered before in this book. Computer screens, cell phone screens, tablet screens. Yeah, I know I'm a junkie. Yet again, Debbie Pearl starts talking about, hey, Hermie's mom, starts talking about how if you let your kid watch screens, the brain is going to rot. She talks about all these statistics that show that lower intelligence, they don't meet their core, where they have to, their core thing that they have to meet. They don't develop at a normal rate. Well, here's what real scientific research on that at Hopkins and other places has conceded. Hey, Gingerly. They figured out that most of the screen time, it really depended upon the interaction of the parents, what the screen time was, even sitting down and watching Bob Esponja, as they call him here, SpongeBob. If you're doing it parent and child together, and it's active watching, and the parent is imparting to the child, hey, did you know, blah, 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 that is one of the best ways to build neural connections, when parents and children are interacting with media like that. And I believe that. I used to play video games with my kids. So basically what they said is any possible negative that could be impugned from these different social media, videos, cartoons, screens, games, can actually be overcome by parental supervision, interaction, whatever. And that not all screen time was bad, which we knew. Even when you're playing a video game, you learn something. You do, even if you're letting your kid play an hour or two a day. I don't know how many of you have seen the very silly movie Pixels. It's one of my favorites because it is a cheesy movie, no doubt about that. He's never going to win an Academy Award. You got Adam Sandler in it. You have silly jokes. But I kind of like the movie. First of all, it's got 2 Game of Thrones actors in it. It's got Peter Dinklage and Sean Bean. And Sean Bean plays kind of a rude, crude kind of character that's 180 degrees away from poor Ned Stark. Well, the premise of the movie is about these kids that are super good at video games, and they're competing in the first video game world championships of 1982. And one of the kids gets beaten by the other, and it pretty much determines the course of his life because he starts visualizing himself as the loser, as the sad sack, even though he was a world champion and Pac-Man and a couple other games. So what happened is the world is under attack from some hostile alien force who's found the time capsule that was shot in space that had a video of the 1982 video games, and they think that those games are a threat of war. So they start attacking the Earth with video games. To cut a very long story short, they managed to defeat the aliens by bringing out the gamers, including the sad sack guy. Oh, good morning, Noel. So they managed to save the world by playing video games, which came about from hours and hours and hours upon screen time. And one of the things I like about it is they make some important distinctions about games then, games now, and what it can do to your brain, what kids think, that sort of thing. So I thought it was a pretty cute little movie that really took a look at what happens with long-term screen exposure. And it pretty much puts paid to everything Debi Pearl is saying about screens, along with research from Hopkins and a number of places. Being very actively involved in what your best I could until they got to a certain age, and it's kind of like, well, that's on you now. It's never a bad thing, television or a movie with your child, and sit there and say, hey, you know what, that's ridiculous, or say, that's a really good point. I like that they did X, Y, and Z. So yet again, you have Debi Pearl fear-mongering, and then she goes on to prove that screens are evil by bringing on an expert. Guess what type of expert she used to prove that screens are evil? A doctor? A researcher? Her chiropractor. Which really made me laugh because I love chiropractic. I love to go get my back adjusted. There is nothing that feels better than having somebody crack your back for you. Chiropractors have their place in this world, but I'm getting distracted by the birds again. But having a chiropractor telling you that your kid looking at screens is going to doom their brains is highly inappropriate. It would be like the guy who is the security guard at the bank diagnosing your illness. It just doesn't work. They have some vague knowledge maybe, but not specialized in that. Now, she had brought somebody on that actually studied this stuff and had something to say about it and had credentials like a scientist. I might be more willing to listen. I'll go back and make sure I covered everything in that. Meh. Okay, a Debi quote, a crazy one. Brain researchers assert that the great dumbing down of this generation is primarily due to the digital playground consuming our children. It is what the brain is not doing when held captive by the screen. If, instead of being exposed to games and movies, children were held in isolation for the same period of time, the dumbing down results would be pretty much the same. So Debi doesn't explain how she came up with that. And it studies or didn't happen. And it's only unlimited screen time early on that causes developmental delays, but they always catch up again. What I was saying earlier about the families doing the active watching together, I took that from an article in Time magazine by various scientists who are studying this. It says not all screen time is detrimental and explains about how families can develop healthy habits around screens and how that actually puts a child ahead. So Debi goes on to complain about college professors saying that they had to dumb down their curriculum to teach students because students did not have the ability to think deeply any longer. She takes us from a book that's almost 30 years old. And here's what's comical about that. I remember my beloved mother-in-law, my mom-in-law, as I used to call her teasingly. She was a college professor. And I
I remember all the way back to 1982, where she was making this same complaint about having to dumb down everything. But she wasn't talking about her students in general. She was talking about her football and basketball students who were on the teams, because LSU was a huge sports school. Sports was king. I could tell you horror stories about that. And she was constantly being leaned on to pass those kids. And she never would. She would not compromise her education. But I remember her complaining in great detail about her football and basketball students, team students. So Debi claims that screens are two-dimensional and God designed our brains to only function in three-dimensional ways. Then she says that the noises from the screens wreck your brain. She goes on to make this claim about screen noises and brain chemicals destroying the brain. Screened electronics are inflicting serious mental impairment on this generation of children. Each type of media, whether it be radio, internet, TV, changes the balance of our individual senses, creating some at the expense of others. Well, here's the thing about that. Everything we literally do every single damn day, for good, for bad, for evil, whatever, for good, impacts us and impacts our brain every day. You heard me last night. I was ranting about my head knocking with a certain other creator. That has impacted me, and I've had to think more about what does our responsibilities as creators look like? What does fighting benefit? So every interaction we have in this world, my interactions with the pool guys this morning, where I came out and brought them baked goods, all of that, everything we do, in fact, affects here and makes us think. It either reinforces our biases and what we think, or it challenges us to rethink about how we're thinking about these things. And if you're open to making changes, or you're open to hearing criticisms from others, at least a little bit, or even if you say, oh, hell no, that's not right, and then later you go back and think, did I really give that person a fair shot? Is that idea genuine? I think when we do those things, all those things make a huge difference on all of us. So that's really the way to be thinking about the brain. And pushback isn't bad. I think that's one thing that the pearls miss in this entire thing, and that a lot of what I call evangelical Christians miss. Struggling, pushback, that sort of thing, criticisms, valid, non-personal attacking criticisms. I'm talking about. I'm not talking about says, "Oh, you're a duty head." They aren't a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to have things to overcome. I know I bitch and moan and cry about my health, but let me tell you something. Having gone through what I've been through with my mast cell has created much more compassion in me. And I'm I have a lot greater empathy for people who are struggling physically, because I know what that's like, and I know how cruel our own world can be towards that. That's why I reacted the way I did last night, because my worldview has told me and informed me that there are a lot of people that treat the disabled much worse than the average person and trample on them quite a bit. So that informs my worldview, and it's not always exactly 100% on the mark. And there are times that I have to back up and say, now, wait a minute, let me think about this again. And that may take me days and days and weeks and months to think about stuff and make those changes that I need to make in my life to be able to adjust. We all do it. Except that in Pearl World, if you're a child especially, but if you're a woman too, you better damn well get with the program, or out comes the flexible 1/4-inch plastic plumbing line, and it gets applied to your rear end. And there are a fair amount of Christians that believe in wife spanking too. So discipline, the goal of discipline should not be to hurt somebody. If you're doing it that way, you're no better than a brute. And that's the same thing with criticism. The aim should not be to hurt somebody. It should be to say, hey, can we do better here? It should always be that way. And I found that child discipline works much better when you put a real world consequence with what they're doing than if you whip out the switch. I still remember the Michael Pearl story where he talked about a family that brought their kids to him because the toddler was disobedient and could not be trained into doing what the toddler was supposed to do. Well, Michael's solution was to drive in the middle of the night with the toddler in his little car seat. And every time the toddler started crying, which a toddler is going to cry if you drag them out at 2 a.m. to drive down the highway in the middle of the night for no reason. So every time the toddler started crying, Michael would pull the car over and switch the child. He said he applied correction until eventually, after so many miles and so many switchings, like an hour or two, the baby stopped crying. How that is not criminal and now how he wasn't charged, I don't have a clue, because that sounds like you're veered into the category of child abuse. It really does. So when I'm doing a review of this book, I have to keep in mind that the Pearl's worldview is if you do not spank your children left and right, they're gonna rebel and run rampant. And the funny thing is Debi keeps pointing to her children as successes. One who's recently divorced. So I guess that notion of you do it this way and you never divorce. One of her sons is divorced, very nasty, ugly divorce, in which the wife fought him successfully for custody and claimed he was cruel with how he beat the children. Neither daughter was able to make the executive function decisions of what clothes to buy or what restaurant to go to. They both struggled with executive functions. Exactly. So the children have not turned out so well. He keeps saying they have been. The girls that are housewives have had their struggles, and they've had to support their lazy, non-working husbands. The son that's divorced and was living in Hawaii, well, the Pearl boys have not maintained steady employment either. So there's something kind of stinky there. You look at, hey, Sunny D, you look at outcomes. You have to look at outcomes in these things and say, wait a minute, something ain't right there. So why anybody is looking to Debi for brain health ideas, I do not know. Debi barely has a high school diploma. She does not have any kind of college degree or any college whatsoever. No training in this. This is all stuff she read off the internet. There are times in here that she refers back to Google and to Google links that aren't even provable or valid. And that is irresponsible in my mind. The good news is this book sold less than a couple of hundred copies, sold very few. Sadly, I was one of those buyers, just so I could do a lengthy chapter by chapter review. So next week we continue on. I don't remember what the next chapter was about or the one after that, but I suspect we're going back to gut health. I think it's gut health next time. Gut health and no screens. Because that's always, it may be, Noelle. And the other thing I thought about with her is she may have extremely limited internet, because here's something I know about evangelical fundamentalists, evangelicals. A lot of them have Net Nanny or other porn preventing things on their computer. And those things are rather Covenant Eyes. That's a huge one. Those things are rather flawed. I mean, Anna Duggar had Covenant Eyes on all of Josh's stuff. And Josh Duggar still managed to get to the dark web and download CP, allegedly. There's only so much those things can do. And one of the things that they do that you can actually take a look at is they prevent you from seeing some real links, and they will refer you to this junk science and these opinion pieces by other Christians while blocking real science for some reason and other things because they think they're somehow sinful or bad or whatever. We had a guy at our old church that I kind of laughed. I knew he had a problem with prawn. I knew he was a PRON enthusiast, okay? And if you look at the statistics, there's more prawn usage in evangelical male world than out there in regular old heathen unbeliever world. Way higher statistics. Even 40% of pastors admit to having looked at porn regularly. So there's that. And he sent around an email after he became convicted of the wrongness of his usages and offered to monitor all the men in the church's computers remotely using Covenant Eyes and other programs. He wanted to be everybody's accountability partner. 99.99% of the guys in the church just completely ignored that. And I don't think anybody actually ever ended up signing up for that. I don't get what drives the desire to watch it. No, well, I don't either. I find it kind of boring. Most of it is so boring. It's the same old in and out, just different arrangements of the same old in and out. So I'm not really sure, because for me, it doesn't do anything to me. For me, I can look at that and go, oh, God, how boring. And with men, it's a different story. They're wired differently than women. Like I said a couple of days earlier, for me, it is all about other stuff than porn. That doesn't do it for me. I know it does for some women. More power to you. I kind of believe that as long as the prawn you're consuming is made consensually, that there's no trafficking situations, there's no force performances. If everybody is a consenting adult and they're happy with it, and you're not addicted to the point where you're ignoring relationships, it's not impacting your relationships, more power to you. That's just the place I finally had to arrive to. Yeah. I like sexual tension. I'm just going to come out and say. And television shows and movies are really great about that. And that was one thing I laughed about with Jane Austen. Even her stories, lots of sexual tension. I still remember watching the latest version and I'm trying to think who it even starred, of Pride and Prejudice, when Mr. Darcy hands her out of the carriage and then she sees him walking off, flexing his hand, looking at it. That's sexual tension. Oh, well, Noelle, it can be destructive. There have been times when it hasn't been good here. And we actually had to have a conversation about it and put some safeguards in place. But at the same time, I don't obsess over it. I just don't. I put it on him not to be watching it. I know he's really good about that. I'm in and out of where his computer. It'd be impossible for him to hide if he was. I just told him I wasn't comfortable with it because I'm not. I'm not comfortable with him consuming that kind of content because I know where it can lead. Men are more visual, so that stuff will do more for them. And as a generalization, exactly. Women generally tend to get more emotional, and the connection or closeness is more important. For a lot of women, that's true, and for a lot of men, not all of them. I've known some women in my lifetime that just love their porn. And like I said, if it's not impacting your real life, then it's relatively harmless. The problem with it is you get guys that become addicted to it, and they have to have it. And they have to have it increasingly weirder and weirder and weirder varieties. Like, example, Josh Duggar. You start with looking at the normal stuff. Somehow you end up downloading Daisy's Destruction. It's always good to be honest with your partner. For men, often it is just more physical. It is. And there are those times when you have to sit down and talk about your sex life too and say, is there something I could be doing that would be something you would want that I might not want, that we would need to talk about and maybe do, that I might be willing to budge on that? There are those things that go on too. So it really is a dance where you have to talk about everything frequently, unfortunately. And to be completely honest and open about those things. And that's on both of you to be honest and open about those things. So yeah, and that's one thing that disturbs me about fundagelicalism and the Lori Alexander 5 minutes in lube conversation. Yes, Lori Alexander has said the same thing that Michelle Duggar and so many others, including Debi Pearl, has said. If your husband approaches you for sex, you say yes every time. Lori says you just pull out the lube and it takes 5 minutes. Debi Pearl has said you have to be an enthusiastic participant. Michelle Duggar, I don't know if she's ever said you have to be an enthusiastic participant, but you definitely have to do it every time. She said anybody can make her husband a sandwich, but not everybody can meet that need. Well, I don't know about that. So there are going to be those times when it's not appropriate. There just are. And it's okay to say no if you're not feeling it. But at the same time, it's a balance, because if you say no, I know, well, yes. But then those times when you're just there's times where you can say no, and there's reasons for it. And then there's times when you should probably just do it anyway. I mean, even if you feel like it's like doing the dishes, there's just going to be those times. We all go through those times. He and I have talked about this quite a bit because we've both been on the spectrum as having desires. Sometimes it's me more than him. Sometimes it's him more than me. And you have to honor your partner's desire. You don't want to be joyfully unavailable all the time, because that brings its own problems. And that has been known to send men. Why is my ear itching? That has been known to send men off the deep end straight into the arms of prawn and other women. Sadly enough, I hate to say it. Oh, so I didn't even mean to start talking about this, but when you talk about the Debi Pearls, the Lori Alexanders, and the Michelle Duggars of this world, it almost always boils down to sex at some basic level. Fundagelicalism has more of a focus on sex than anything I've seen outside in the outside world. Even prawn performers aren't that focused on sex, as a lot of them are. And I don't get it, because sex isn't even mentioned that frequently in the Bible. It is mentioned, but not in those obsessional terms. Okay, Noelle, you go. I'm going to go anyway. My lungs are crapping out and I'm feeling really weird. And what is my husband doing back so soon? He wasn't supposed to be back before noon. He had a meeting this morning for his teaching thing he does. And I did tell him I need to go out and get oil paints. I'm out. Okay, love you guys. I'm going to go. Have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. We're going to do Love After Lockup, which we have to watch.